Can you hear me okay? I'll use it. I'll use it? Yes, okay, thank you. I'll do that. Um,
Okay, is
so,
mine on? Yeah, okay.
so good morning. I'm John. This is my wife, Missy. The last time we were here, which was our first time, was 3 years ago in 2020 during, I guess, the beginning of COVID. And it was very nice to meet you guys and visit with you and get introduced to your church. With Sunday School Hour, we want to share some stories and share a couple different aspects of our ministry. Our ministry is really,
Diverse.
it's diverse. That's a good word. And so we want to have a question and answer. Yeah, Joshy.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna apologize right now. We forgot our ADHD medicine for our son Joshy, so just so you know, he might be trying to join it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's totally fine.
That would be great.
Joshy, you've heard our stories before, so yeah.
S-
We one thing we love about Sunday school, or like we kind of like casual setting. We like people feeling free to ask questions, because we would much rather talk to you guys about what you're interested in hearing than us just lecturing you. So we have some stories prepared to tell you guys. And I know one thing that we always get asked about is our children, how we adopted our children. So I was going to tell you guys a story about our kids. But if at any time you guys want to raise hands and interrupt us, we're happy to answer questions. And then if you guys have questions to ask, we can answer those instead of going on with all of our stories at any point. Okay.
So why don't you start off with the kids?
Okay, so our kids, John and I, when we got married, I actually told him not to marry me unless he wanted to have 10 kids because I always had a heart for adopting kids. I always wanted to have kids of my own and I wanted to adopt. And I think he thought I was cute, so he agreed. I don't think he really had a passion for adopting, but he was like, all right. So from the very beginning, I kept thinking at some point we're going to adopt kids. But when we first got married, we became house parents. So we had 15 kids living with us. We really couldn't adopt anymore, and we were having our own children. And then when we moved to the mission field and I saw all these orphans, I thought, oh, surely this is where God's going to call us to adopt. But we soon found out that it's illegal to adopt in Nigeria if you're not Nigerian. So I was like, wow, why did God move me to a country where you can't adopt, but give me a heart for adoption? So then one day we're sitting there watching a movie, and it was just a silly movie about this family that adopted some kids. And it was supposed to be like a comedy. It wasn't really a sad movie. But I just felt so convicted that I was supposed to adopt that I got up and left the room, and I sat in my bedroom. And I was crying because I just felt this burden on my heart. And I remember telling the Lord, I don't understand why you're doing this to me because I'm willing to adopt, but you put me in a country where it's illegal to adopt. And there's so many kids that need help. Like, how would I even know which child? So as I was praying to the Lord, I basically said to the Lord, if you want me to adopt, then you have to solve all these problems. You have to put a child on my lap so I know this is a child I'm supposed to adopt. You have to open the doors for me to adopt. And you have to change my husband's heart because he's not really interested in adopting. So then I told John how this conversation I had with God, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, Missy. This is a common routine in our marriage." Oh, okay, yeah, Missy. He said, "Well, if God puts a child on your lap, we know this is a kid, and He opens the doors and He changes my heart. Yes, we'll adopt."
Because I really want to make it difficult for God. So let's just,
Yeah.
hey, Lord, I'm not sure about this. We're going to make this really
Yeah.
difficult.
The more difficult you make it for God, the more you know it's actually God and not yourself. So it works out okay. So then just a couple days later, I was doing outreach in one of the brothels. And there's this little girl laying on the floor, and I thought she was dead. And she was 16 months old, and she was just laying in her own feces, looked disgusting, and I thought she was dead. So I went and touched her, and she barely moved. So I said to the brothel owner, I said, why don't you let me take this baby? I said, maybe I can save her life. And the brothel owner said, well, how much are you going to pay for her? I said, I'm not going to buy her. I said, I have 4 children of my own. I don't need a baby. I said, but you need me to take this baby. She's going to die on you. And she just kept saying, how much are you going to pay for her? And I said, listen, no one's going to pay for her. I said, look at her. She's a piece of trash. Tomorrow you will take her out with the trash. I said, why don't you let me take her so you don't have to explain to the police why there's a dead baby in your trash can? And she said, okay, fine, take her. So that's literally how I got my first daughter, Nancy. I picked her up, and she was so disgusting. The smell on her was so repulsive that I was afraid if I held her close, I would start vomiting. So I held her out as far as I could. She was covered in feces, and she was covered in bukatu, which is like moonshine, locally made alcohol. They'd been feeding her beer in a bottle so she wouldn't cry. So I took her I stopped to get some clean diapers and some wet wipes, and then I took her right to the hospital. And I talked to the doctor, and I said, listen, we'll do whatever it takes to save this baby's life, but can we do it at my house? Because the hospital's there, the nurses don't come and take care of you like they do in the States. They don't have running water. You have to stay overnight taking care of your patient. So I said, I have 4 kids at home. Let me take the baby home. We'll pay for a nurse to come to the house, and I'll bring her in to see the doctor. And the doctor looked at me and said, Missy, you don't understand. This baby is probably going to die, and I don't want her to die in front of your children. So let's keep her here at the hospital. So I called John. I said, hey, guess what? Remember how you said if I found a baby?
Wow, God, you move really quickly.
Yeah. John even said, we can't keep this baby. I said, okay, if you can take a baby back to a brothel, I'll let you. But I can't do it.
Totally unfair tactics.
Yeah, it was unfair. Yeah. So we basically were like, with this baby, didn't know what to do. We put her in the hospital and IV antibiotics. She had severe pneumonia. She was malnourished. She was dehydrated, and she had to go through alcohol withdrawal. She was drunk. And her name, Nancy, it means the presence of God. And I think that's what kept her alive, because there was really no reason for her to stay alive. But once she started coming out of her alcohol drunkenness, she screaming all the time. I could tell she had a lot of fight in her, which was a good sign. And I started talking to all the Nigerians that we knew, Christian Nigerians, saying, hey, would you be interested in adopting this baby? Because we didn't think we could legally keep her. And every single one said, Missy, this one's better off dead. I don't know why you're trying to save her. Just let her die. Everyone assumed she was going to have brain damage. Well, we couldn't just let her die. So after 3 weeks in the hospital, we brought her home. And we thought we would probably have a kid that would have special needs. We brought her home, and it's not like America where you can just call and say, hey, we need an occupational therapist to come help us. We just had to figure everything out on our own. And we literally just put her in the middle of our children. She was afraid of us, but she wasn't afraid of our kids. So we put her in the middle of our kids, and our children taught her how to crawl and walk. And now, Nancy, she actually legally changed her name to Nicole. So her middle name is now Nancy. So Nicole is now 13. She's top of her class in math. She's doing accelerated math. She has taught herself piano. She sits down and plays Mozart, and I just sit and cry. And she's incredible. She's all muscle. You would never know where she came from. She's a total miracle child. But after having her in our home for 6 months, John came and said to me, he's like, Missy, there's got to be a way to adopt this baby. He's like, I'm going to get her adopted. So, because I was thinking she's just going to be permanent foster baby forever. So God did change his heart. John found some lawyers down in Lagos that were doing international adoptions. He flew them up to Jos, and then we hired some local lawyers, and they studied the law. And the law is called the Child Protection Acts Rights Law. And in there it clearly says you must be Nigerian to adopt. But there's another line that says the Commissioner of Women's and Children's Affairs can make exceptions to any of these laws. So the lawyer from Lagos said, we're going to use this line. We're going to go meet the commissioner. She's going to make an exception for you guys. We went in, told the whole story. I even took the commissioner to the brothel where we got Nancy from. And the whole time as I'm talking to her, I've got Nancy all cuddled in my chest, sucking on her finger. It was obvious she was already my daughter. And so the lawyer looked at the commissioner and said, this law is called the Child Protection Acts Rights Law. If you use it to take Nancy out of the Camiola's house, you'll have used it for what it was not intended to do. You'll have used it to hurt a child rather than protect a child. She said, let's look at the law together and see if we can't use it for what it was intended to do and protect Nancy and keep her in the Camiola's house. And when she said that, I looked up at the commissioner, and she had tears running down her eyes. And she said, whatever, sorry, I'm going to cry too saying it. She goes, whatever you write, I will sign. So we became the first international couple to ever get custody of a Nigerian child in Plateau State. So, and which opened the doors for other families to adopt as well. So she's not that little anymore, but she's our miracle child. So, and then our next son, Joshua, I rescued, and he even said when we showed up this morning, he goes, I hope you're going to talk about me. I said, don't worry, I will. So I rescued his mom out of a brothel. She was selling herself while pregnant with Joshie. And she was mentally ill. She had schizophrenia, and she was HIV positive. So I took her into Grace Gardens 4 months pregnant, and we got her on antiviral medicine, and we're taking care of her. And she kept saying she wanted to sell him. Well, we don't allow people to sell babies, but we told her we'd help find a family to adopt him. But because mom was HIV positive and had schizophrenia, nobody wanted Joshua. So when he was born, we actually thought we had a family lined up. And when he was born, his birthday was yesterday, so I was actually thinking about all these details quite a bit yesterday. And when he was born, the doctor didn't get there in time. So, this woman had had several babies, so it was a very fast delivery. So when we got to the clinic, the doctor didn't get there in time, so I actually delivered him myself. And I thought there was another family that was going to be adopting him, so I didn't have anything ready. But they called actually while I was in the middle of delivering him and said, we've changed our mind. So I brought him home, and I put him in a Rubbermaid box to sleep in because I didn't have anything set up for him. And we tried finding families to adopt him, but no one was interested. So after just a couple months, John and I were like, we're trying to convince families to take a baby we already love. So.
And with her story, I was actually flying back to the States, and I was on a plane, and Missy and I were having this conversation. She said to me, she goes, Cynthia's going to go into labor while you're gone. And I was like, yes, and we are not adopting this child. So you will find a family for this child.
And I promised him we would find a family, but we found us. So, yeah, so after a couple months, we decided to keep him. And he's crazy, but he's been a huge blessing.
He really loves Jesus. Like, he has such a soft heart for the gospel. He really wants to study Scripture. I think he's going to be a pastor or a preacher in his future.
I took him to a new school this week, and on the way there, he goes, do they talk about Jesus? Because if they don't talk about Jesus, I'm not going. So he's a good kid. Yeah. And then our third child, Hadassah, she's the one running around with a little poofy hair. We are an approved shelter for NAPTIP. So at this point, most of our victims in our ministry actually come from the government. NAPTIP is the federal organization in Nigeria for stopping human trafficking. So whenever they rescue kids in pretty much a 3-4 state radius, they bring them to us. We're their number one house that they bring them to. So when they rescued Hadassah at 3 days old, she was for sale. She was being sold for human sacrifices at 3 days old. She was being transported from the north of Nigeria to the south to be sold for human sacrifices. But when she was being transported, someone noticed on public transportation these two guys with a tiny little newborn baby and no diaper bag. And so they alerted the authorities, and they arrested the two guys, and they brought her to us. And so when they brought her to us, they said, usually if we have a healthy young baby, we can find families to adopt. But they said, you can't adopt her out to a Christian family because she's from the north, so she must be Muslim. And I said, well, then you need to find a Muslim ministry that does what I do, because we don't adopt to Muslims, we only adopt to Christians. So they all turned around and whispered amongst themselves. And it was a big deal when she was rescued, because she's the youngest victim of human trafficking ever rescued in Nigeria by NAPTIP. So it was all over the news. When they brought her to me, she came with like 3 police cars, an ambulance. Like, everyone wanted to be a part of this story. And when they all showed up, one of our staff members looked at me and goes, oh, Missy, what did you do? I'm like, I don't always cause the trouble, but. So it was big news. So there's like maybe 20 of these guys, and they're all like whispering to each other, and then they turned around and they said, okay, you can adopt her to whoever you want, because they knew there was no Muslim ministry that does what I do. But we couldn't adopt her out until the court case was over, and they were trying to find her birth mother. But after 7 months of not being able to find her birth mother, they came to us and said, okay, you can adopt her out. But by then, we were already mom and dad, so we kept Hadassah, and she's been a huge blessing to us. So I always say I feel a little old to be a mother of a 5-year-old. But if you're going to be a mother of a 5-year-old, she's the one to do it. She's always full of joy, and she's a cute, sweet little personality. And then we just adopted one more child. We don't normally show pictures of him or anything, so when we talk during service, we won't have pictures of him because it's kind of disturbing. If someone wants to see a picture, you can ask me. I'll show it to you. But our daughter was volunteering in the hospital, and she was there when his mother brought him in. His grandmother wasn't happy that her son had a child with this woman. So she tried to kill the baby. She put the baby in a fire. And so the mother came in trying to save his life, and we thought he was going to die. He was in the hospital for like a year. And we tried taking care of mom and him together. But then eventually the mom started trying to starve him to death because she just didn't want to be burdened with him. So we adopted him because no one else would adopt him. And he's still in Nigeria. He's one, we haven't been able to get visas to get him to the States, but he also requires a lot of care. He has no face. He's blind. And there's some brain damage from the fire too. So he needs around-the-clock care. So we have him in Nigeria with caretakers all the time. So if you hear us talk about our son Chochi, that's our last child that we adopted about a year ago. So. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's some of our stories with our kids. I joke around about Choji. I have some fun nicknames for him, and he's just a great kid. He jumps around, and if you want to see pictures of him,
Yeah.
but it's hard to see his
Yeah.
face. And with his story, Josie, she's a nursing student at Liberty. She's a junior. When she was doing this ministry to the pediatric ward at the hospital and wanted to help this child, she was like, "Dad, we got to help this child. We got to help this child." And I thought, I'll be honest with you and transparent. I really thought, Lord, you should probably take the life of this child. This child has no opportunity. And Josie's just like, "Dad, we got to help. We got to help." And when it finally was going down the path of he's probably going to join our family, I'll be really open with you. I didn't really want that. I was like, Lord, this is a heavy burden that I'm not sure I want. And I was telling Josie, like, I don't know if we're the right fit. And you could see my pattern of behavior with adoption of kids. I'm a little stubborn, and it takes me a little bit longer. But Josie, we always teach in our family the sanctity of life. And this is where you actually, theory meets practice. And Josie was like, "But Dad, you've always taught us about the sanctity of life. Why would you not do that for this child?" And I was like, "Oh, that hurts." So I said, "Okay, if the Lord opens up the doors for Choji to be part of our family, we're going to have him join our family."
And they told us, the doctors told us that Choji would be like a vegetable because there's so much brain damage. But he's actually, he's not like a normal child, but he's definitely doing more than we expected. And I think just he's in a safe environment now where he's well taken care of. So he's actually happy. He laughs most of the time, which I didn't even think he would laugh. We put him in a swing and he laughs. And he loves to be thrown up and down in the air. So, but he's gotten too heavy for me to do it. So I take him down to the gate and the guards throw him up and down and he just laughs. So he doesn't really know that his face is a mess. He doesn't know what he's missing out on. So he's actually a happy little child, and he doesn't talk, but he communicates when he's hungry. He goes and sits in the chair we feed him in. That's how we know he's hungry. When he wants to listen to music, he hits the radio. So he's doing more than we expected him to do. So we'll just see. We don't know what God has in store for him. We don't know how much healing God's going to allow him to have. But he's our little guy now. So.
Okay, so with the time that's remaining, we want to give an opportunity for question and answer. I just want to share a little bit. I have a couple things I wanted to show you. As Missy and I were just sharing, we do have a diversified ministry. And when we first started to Nigeria, I was teaching at a mission school, and we'll share some of the stuff in the service. I was teaching at a mission school. Missy was an accompanied spouse. Then Grace Gardens with birth. And then I started focusing on something called business as missions. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. And I work with the persecuted church. So we could start with this one. This is great. Okay, so just to give you kind of an overview, we do a lot of different things, and not to overwhelm you guys, Missy primarily focuses with the women and children in the safe house. We have a school and a couple other things. Our ministry, while we do things together, we've kind of combined things for a purpose of legality in Nigeria. Business as missions is not really an understood concept with the Nigerian government. So think of our ministry as Grace Gardens is our ministry, our NGO, our non-for-profit. And then we have a company, a registered company in Nigeria. It's a business, and it's called CGR Africa. And I'm in the country not as a missionary, but as a businessman. I anticipate that missionaries will be kicked out of Nigeria in the near future. So we wanted to position ourselves in a way that we could easily travel all over the country and all over Africa if God ever opened up a door. And people love businessmen because there's investment. And businessmen create opportunities, and businessmen have opportunities to meet with governors and sheikhs and malams, and it's kind of why I grow my beard out. I don't think in 2003 I had 3 years ago I didn't have a beard, but I figured out a strategy. If I'm going into the core north of Nigeria, I need to look like a Muslim. So I got olive complexion, I look Lebanese, and I could fit well. So with that, I just want to share a little bit about our help with persecuted church. So you can see on our table there's Voice of the Martyrs, and maybe some of you guys are familiar. We have a strategic partnership with Voice of the Martyrs. So nine years ago, VOM approached me to see if I would become their field leader in Nigeria to help and develop their work in Nigeria. So any story that you read in the magazine about Nigeria, it's my ministry. And where we are today in our relationship is we have a partnership. So they're their own entity, and we're our own entity. And we have great relationship, things like that. So we go to the next slide. So the writing is really small. Sorry about that. I would say today, because of the population in Nigeria, there are many who say in organizations that respond to persecution, Nigeria is the toughest place for a Christian to live in the world today. Because of the mass amount of Christians in the world, we are the largest, most populated country in Africa. 1 out of every 4 Africans is Nigerian. And we have a population that's 50% Christian and 50% Muslim. So when you see persecution throughout the world, in North Africa, in the Middle East, or in Asia, the Christian population is really small. So Christians get attacked, and there's some really bad cases. Christian persecution around the world is terrible. But when your nation is 110 million who are Christians, it's amazing that Christians get attacked at the scale that they're being attacked. Then let me give you a perspective. In northern Nigeria, in one given year, 2,400 churches were destroyed, burnt down, okay? In an area that's an hour and a half, just a few months ago, an area called Mangu, it's an hour and a half from my house, close to 500 Islamic extremists, a militia came in and wiped an area pretty hard. So 35,000 people got displaced, over 400 houses burnt, 29 churches destroyed, and over 450, I think 250 were dead in a matter of 2 days, okay? So our brothers and sisters who are in Nigeria are facing extreme persecution, okay? So our ministry, Grace Gardens, we have a huge need a huge ministry opportunity where we help the women and children of human trafficking, but we've now added under the umbrella of Grace Gardens persecuted response, just to keep it nice and neat. Okay, let's go through the next slide. Okay, so how Missy and I, we work really close to close, but my primary focus is to help our persecuted response. So how do we do that? Right now, we have about 1,500 widows that we take care of, okay? We also distribute a couple 100,000 of Bibles every year. One of the things I think is really important is if you take care of someone, you have to take care of someone mentally, physically, and spiritually. Sometimes ministries will touch on 1 or 2 things, but it's a holistic approach. Many of you guys are familiar with this analogy, teach a man a fish, right? We all understand that illustration, teach a man a fish, he eats for his life. I say in Nigeria or in Africa, they don't have access to the pond. It's a very Western phrase. But we can give them the tools, but we have to give them access to those tools and access to the market. So,
and when John was recruited to work alongside Voice of the Martyrs, the reason why they recruited him is because John was already doing business in Nigeria to support Grace Gardens. And they said, we keep coming and starting businesses for our widows, for our pastors, but they keep failing and we don't understand why. So they said, but we see you doing business and it's successful. So we want you to help us, help the ladies and the pastors. So John, because we'd already been living in the culture and he'd realized that these ministries they come on short-term trips and they're like, oh, let's give all the widows a grinding machine. And it makes a good picture and they send it home, but they don't teach them any business skills, how to advertise, how to manage your money, how to reinvest in your business. And then if you gave all the women in a community a grinding machine, you also took away all their customers because now everybody has a grinding machine. So John, after living in the country, he understands what the culture needs, how to do business, and his mind just, it doesn't work like other people's mind. John thinks of businesses constantly. So he was able to come in and do things that other ministries weren't doing, which is why we have some really successful businesses for our ladies.
Okay, so I don't know if you remember from last time we talked. So the way God has wired me is I'm not a church planter. I'm not a pastor. I don't have those giftings. I'm gifted as an entrepreneur and a visionary. And if you remember, I came from an Italian mob background, so I don't speak Christianese very well, and I think outside the box quite often. So with that, I saw these needs of these women and the children and the pastors that we serve, and they can't feed themselves. They can't sustain themselves. And I'm going, this has to be part of our ministry to help create self-sustainability. So with that, we started creating different programs. So we go to next slide. So some of the things we help, we do business setups. They're usually about like a $2,000 to $2,500 business setup. They're in animal rearing. They do pottery. They're doing sewing. They're doing all these different things. We have a baking academy. We're trying to create businesses where I look at it and I go, what do they need on a monthly support to not survive, but to thrive? I don't like just for people to survive. I want people to thrive. So we create business plans, we create a SWOT analysis, we figure out an ROI for them, and then we bring them through a business school, business training. They're in our program for 4 years. We have a social worker that walks alongside with them. They're getting discipled. And in 4 years, we figure out goals and objectives for them to graduate and be able to help others in their community.
Like an example of how John works with business is we were bringing in all these widows who, like, they've never gone to school, they can't read, they don't know basic math, and John's trying to help them set up businesses. And he's like, it's going to take us years to get them educated enough to where they can handle the books and do their business. He's like, I feel like we just need to figure out something they can already do and invest in it. So most of them were farmers, but they're just like farming enough food for themselves to eat. You know, they weren't thinking big business. They're just farming, you know, some cucumbers and carrots and whatever grows in their little land that they've now lost. And so John was like, we got to figure out a way to make farming more successful. So he started praying about it, looking around. And then he realized in Kenya, they grow roses at the same altitude we are in Jos. And Kenya supplies most of Europe with their roses. And then we don't have a lot of long stem roses in Nigeria. But if the wealthy people in the cities, if they order them from Europe. So that means they're going from Kenya to Europe to Nigeria. So John's like, roses, we got to grow roses, which we know nothing about farming or growing roses.
I'm a city boy from New York and have no knowledge about farming.
So when John first told me this idea, I'm like, that's so stupid. Like, we don't know how to grow roses. So we're also very blunt. But then we run a coffee shop in Jos, and you know, most of our customers are Nigerian, most of them are black. So whenever a white person comes in, if we don't know them, we go introduce ourselves because there's not very many white people. So we saw this white man sitting with his African wife. So John went up and started talking to him. Turns out he's an agronomist, a Jewish agronomist that married a Nigerian and now lives in Jos. And he's become a Christian, so he's a Jewish believer. And he used to work in Kenya in the rose farms. And I was like, oh.
Divine appointments.
Yeah. So we right away started talking to him, got a contract with him where he was going to help us get roses and teach us how to do it and teach us how to do the greenhouses. But also when we were talking to him, there was one other point I was going to make and I forgot now. I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Oh, he taught us about kibbutz. Like, we didn't really know what a kibbutz was, but he's like, you got to get these women set up in a kibbutz. So one woman is caring for the kids, one woman is cooking food for everyone, and then the rest of the women are farming. So they can all help each other and work in a community, and then they share the profits. And so that's how we set up our rose farms, like a kibbutz.
Okay, let's see what the next slide is. Okay, so with just the amount of time, I'd love to give you a question and answer. The mentality that I have is to create micro-franchise business models that are proven, and you can roll them out for a widow with whatever she wants. She wants to go into sewing, she wants to do cooking, she wants to do bakery, she wants to do tailoring, she wants to farm. Like, whatever it is, we have this set model, like a franchise here in the US, and we roll it out for them. So we have right now, currently, we have about 25 businesses in operation, and we have about 19 proven micro franchise business models that we can roll out a woman into, or a pastor, or an evangelist frontline worker. We can go to the next slide. These are some pictures of the people we serve. And then we also heavily got into education. So we started an academy. We put about 1,000 kids on scholarship through schools throughout Nigeria. And so we think that's really important to help the next generation of families with education. Next slide. Okay, I think we could close that out. So with the time that's there, I'd love to, I feel like I rushed, but I'd love to answer any questions if you have any. If not, don't worry, we have more material to share with you.
I know.
Well, we love stories, interact, ask questions. I can't wait for one of you guys to come out. Some of you are like, I don't know about that. Think about it if you have questions, but here's,
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Go ahead, Vali.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Actually, Plateau, where we live, is the breadbasket of the country.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, it's the hardest hit state where Islamic extremists are hitting right now. And so the governor is really trying to push for agriculture, and we're trying to come in as a company to bring consultants, believers, into Nigeria to help with farming projects.
Yeah.
We've got a couple different ideas, so
Yeah,
if you guys want to come aboard, it's an adventure.
People always think, oh, the mission field needs pastors, teachers, and doctors, which is true. We do need those things. But they don't think, oh, I could use my skill as a farmer or my skill as a carpenter. But John and I, we pray all the time that God will bring us people with real skills. Like, not that being a pastor is not a real skill, but what I'm saying is, like, we need tangible skills that these guys can learn. Carpentry, mechanics, farming. We've got a lot of our widows have teenage boys, and they're needing jobs, and the unemployment rate in Nigeria is over 60%. So you can't just say, go find a job. You have to create your own business, your own sustenance.
So maybe you have some bakers here in the church, or people who know how to can, furniture makers, candle makers, farmers. I'm going to throw these all out to you because someone, yes, sir. We have tons of land to farm. Tons available farm. We live on a plateau. We're 3,000 feet above sea level. We have a lot of volcanic areas, so our soil is really rich. The problem is, so if you think about it as a farmer, I talked to some gentlemen at the table who are farmers. Seem like you have a community with a lot of farmers here, right? That's an obvious observation, sorry. With that being said, how it works in our land, farmers grow their crops. The Islamic extremists, there's a nomadic group called the Fulanis. They're animal herders, and their animals just herd the land. So just imagine cows just walking wherever through your farm, destroying your crop. And so the Fulani's mentality is destroy the crops, bring our animals in, we destroy all the grains, all the fertilizer, we economically destroy the community, we go after the pastors, take the spiritual heads, the elders out of the community, and then we take over and we just play tough guy. And who takes control of the land? They take control of the land. The Christians are like, well, we should turn our cheek. But many Christians have come to the point, how many times can we turn the cheek? And so what we want to do is, if we could, this is my theory. I have no clue if this will work. But I think economics has a powerhouse in the country. We can use economics with discipleship and evangelism. And then if we add a security aspect to be preventative, we could actually help the Christian farmers in their communities to own their land. This is land that's been owned for hundreds of years. And anyway, I said a lot.
Yeah, the economy in Nigeria is really bad right now. When we first got to Nigeria, $1 was worth 150 naira. Now it's worth almost 1,000 naira. So the economy American dollars are worth a lot of money. So, and everybody's hurting. So you can actually buy land. Like where we live, we're like right in the middle of the city. So property is expensive where we are. But outside of the town where you would buy farmland, John can tell you how much we just bought some farmland for us, and it wasn't that expensive, a few $1,000s or something. So so most of these ladies, if we're going to set them up on their own farm, we usually get a sponsorship from Voice of the Martyrs, and they buy them a piece of land so they can farm it.
So
It's not huge. It's not like, I heard some of the farmers say you guys have like 3,000 acres. Not like that. We're like a couple acres for them. Nothing like what
Don't
you
worry,
guys are talking
we're going to
about.
get there someday. No, I'm
Yeah.
just kidding.
But
But
our rose farm, we bought a large piece of land right outside town, and we built greenhouses, and we have a lot of ladies working in the. So we retain ownership and control of it, but the ladies earn good money working there, taking care of the roses.
But I think where farmers could come in is teaching techniques, how to store grains, crop rotation, and things like that. I believe very much in divine appointments. I don't know if you guys use that terminology. Well, I always ask God, can you bring the right people into our path? Farmland, and so for me, I look at it, yes, there's a local market need, but you could even do it for exporting. So I was asking God, like, what are some things that we could grow for export where they would get more value for their money? And I'm like, just Lord, will you introduce me to this person? And I always say, hey, I know a guy who knows a guy. So I know a guy who knows a guy who turns out to be the buyer for Costco. And he's like, hey, could you potentially supply broccoli? That's a great crop that they could grow locally for exportation. And he does all the Costco's for broccoli, for frozen broccoli. So I just think we just need to think outside the box. But people who have that skill setting could easily come in and just be like laid out. So
John's ideas are always like a million miles ahead of where
a little
where we
overwhelming,
are.
sorry.
Yeah, where we are. So like, he always has a ton of ideas, and I laugh at a lot of his ideas. But almost all that we're doing was once an idea John had. So when he has lots of ideas, I like sit there and try to sift through one that's good. But he always has a million ideas, so don't let him overwhelm you too much. But we are always looking for experts because, like we say every time we speak, we always tell people, if you walk away going, those two are a couple knuckleheads, it totally has to be God working in Nigeria, then we were successful because that's the truth. We're a couple knuckleheads we would have never thought we'd be missionaries. Like when we felt God calling us to Nigeria, we're literally like, we'll clean toilets, whatever you need us to do, because we just didn't feel like we were missionary material. And God has used us, and we basically have said we just have a front row seat to watching God do some really incredible things. So God just keeps bringing the right people and keeps putting things in our path that we get to be a part of. But we're a couple of knuckleheads. So really, like I wouldn't want anyone to not go to the mission field or even not go on a short-term mission trip because they're like, oh, it's better I just send my money. They don't need me. The truth of the matter is God's not short of money. I mean, we're always needing money for Grace Gardens, but if we don't have the money, it's because it's not the right time and it's not in his will yet. So God has plenty of money. When churches are like, you should just send the money. I'm like, no, send the people. Like, people are more important than money. They come with skills, knowledge, and then they walk away praying and caring about people on the other side of the world. So.
Someone here had a question? Yes. So our widows are spread all over Nigeria. So for our teaching farm, we have widows that live in Jos. Otherwise, we will invest in their local areas. So they'll come in, they'll do some skill training. There's a good farming group out of Florida called ECHO that we're trying to build a partnership. They develop different training models for all different environments. So there's a lot of great opportunities for networking, but, you know.
And our goal isn't to take the Christians out of the North. So, like, if we go to a community to help that's been attacked, if the Christians have a safe place to live, we can just help rebuild their church, help them maybe get some things to help their farm improve or their business improve. We'll do it where they're at. But a lot of times the pastor who was killed is a Muslim background believer. So that means his whole family is Muslim. And in the Muslim culture, and basically in Nigerian culture, a woman belongs to her husband. So when he dies, she now belongs to his family. She's property. So if we leave a wife in a situation like that, then they will force her to marry a Muslim man, and they'll send her children to a Muslim school. So that's why we relocate women down to the south when that's the situation. So we do have a lot of widows in Jos that we find apartments for, and we care for, and we educate their kids, and we take care of their medical needs. And then eventually the goal is that we help them get a house or a little piece of property. But those that are not safe where they are, we move to Jos, but the others we keep up in the north where they're at.
Okay, we got a couple more minutes. Any questions? I can't wait for all of you to sign up to come out and visit us in Nigeria. Yes.
Chibok. So Chibok, that was a story that got a lot of attention. And the story's not good, so I'm sorry. It's going to be sad to tell you. It happens. That's just the only story that got attention, but it happens on maybe a monthly basis in Nigeria. Girls are just kidnapped in mass and taken, and most of them are used as suicide bombers or as child brides, and most of them you never see again. So of the Chibok girls, I heard there's about 6 that were able to escape, but the rest, people don't know what has happened to them. And once in a while, you'll see in one of the videos Boko Haram makes or something, you'll see, someone thinks they see their daughter with a burqa on next to a guy, but that's all they know. So
Actually, some of the women that we serve, they were kidnapped by Boko Haram, and they escaped, and so we're helping them as an individual basis.
yeah,
And their stories are
it's pretty
really
horrific.
traumatic.
Yeah. The Save Our Girls signs didn't help that much. So, but we as Americans do have power to change things like that. Like, people don't realize the way we vote in America affects countries like that. So like, if the U.S. put pressure on Nigeria, the Nigerian government could stop what's going on in Nigeria. But right now, it's government-backed genocide of Christians in Nigeria. The government in Nigeria is complicit with it. So that's why it's not stopping, because they want to get rid of Christians so that the Muslims have more power. So when we vote for people who are like, oh, it's fine the way they treat Christians in America, then it affects us in Nigeria. So we do have power, but it's at the ballot.
Well, I think it's about time.
Yeah.
It's 10:20. This has been great. Thank you.